Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. We just wrapped up Houston, 150 players, and we're going to get right into it because there is a lot of interesting stuff to discuss. First things first, what you're seeing on your screen, a little different from what you usually see on your screen. We have the usual top cut, courtesy of Avis, Weiss Tea Time. We also have some more data because Bushiroad has finally given us the data that we actually have wanted for this whole time, or at least a lot of the data that we've wanted for this whole time. A lot more representation data and specific results from individual players. So it's going to be a whole lot better analysis of these events with this extra data. So we're going to go through Top Cut real quick. 150 players, like we said. First place, Lyco Reco 8 Salvage. Relatively standard list. Hololives in top 8. Two of them, 8 standby Hololive. Second place and third place, Oski Polka, Oski Choco. So a couple different ways to pilot an 8 standby Hololive list. This is a list that you and I both kind of bemoaned the death of at one point. We both thought that it wasn't in a good spot anymore.
Well, partly because it lost some utility. It lost some utility prematurely. We initially suspected that there was some outs to it, but it wasn't feasible during was like the following meta.
Yeah. I feel like I just keep being wrong about this deck, frankly. Like, I really liked it when it was present and winning events. And then the hit came down, and I was like, oh, it'll be fine. It'll survive. It did not survive. And that's okay. It really is dead. And then as soon as I think it's dead, I'm like, I don't know, like maybe it'll hang out at the fringes of the meta, like a true believer kind of thing. No, here it is, second and third in one of the biggest North American regionals, and with two different sets of combos. You're seeing the Polka with the Oski, you're seeing the Choco with the Oski, so multiple ways to play it. It's still doing the Luna thing, right? Like that's still what it's leaning into, 4 copies of Luna at the top. But as an archetype, 8 standby Hololive lives. You still get to play all of this crazy good Hololive utility because it's still got all of that utility. I'm very happy to see this here. I thought this set was not going to impress this year. I thought that we'd finally kind of reached the end of the Hololive days, but to see 8 standby Hololive is pretty impressive. And it's definitely back, and you have to pay attention to it. The other one in top 8 was actually a standby Sora list that also techs in the Marine finisher with a single copy of the CX. So, like, you're playing 4 bars, you're playing all this really good Hololive utility. Why not play into a good finisher alongside the Neg Soul Sora package? So I like it. I like the creativity that we're seeing in these lists as well, ways to kind of resurrect them and bring them back into prominence. But I also agree with what you were talking about, where the meta is kinder to it now. The slime meta wasn't as kind to this just because there was something that could deal with the board a lot more effectively. There isn't really anything that deals with the board like that in prominence right now, although you do also see a pair of slimes in top 8. We'll get there. Hololive is in a position where it can be the board deck now. And we talked about this back in the season preview. We talked about maybe there's a world in which Hololive, like the 8 standby list, becomes the board deck. And because it kind of fills in that spot in the meta, maybe it can be relevant in that way once again. And it looks like it has absolutely taken that path and run with it. Because here it is. It's all big stuff. It's all big board stuff that Hololive is doing now in 2025 to maintain its relevance. Hololive, the set that just will not go away.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to see that resurgence come through, especially being able to see three Hololive decks within top eight. I think is really telling, especially with all of them having some element of standby with them.
Speaking of things with an element of standby, this Azure Lane list is very interesting. 6 standby, 2 choice. But it's playing a lot of this standby stuff in part so it can play all of these soul triggers for this unicorn finisher. Unicorn says on attack mill, if that card has a soul trigger, burn one. You can do that 3 times for the middle position and 2 for the other positions in the front row. So effectively, you get free endless 8 when you play enough soul triggers. Obviously, there will be a couple of whiffs, but not very many whiffs in this 36 soul trigger list. Oh, also, it's playing the cats package. This is some wild stuff, but it's this is as honest a deck as you're going to see. It is doing something very specific, and that is pushing damage from the first turn of the game. It's a standby version of Bremerton in a lot of ways. It doesn't get to slam 1k ones because it only has the 2 choice triggers. So it is slamming standby instead, but obviously you slam standby enough times, you trigger standby enough times, you start to get these 2 soul units on the board. Everything has a soul trigger. You're pushing plenty of damage in the mid game with this. And then the unicorn finisher is just good. No enterprise in top cut, which surprises me. I think enterprise is super, super strong, but the downside to enterprise obviously is that you don't get to play cats, you don't get to play anything outside of the color package. Unicorn doesn't have that kind of restriction. It just says play soul triggers, and when you tell Weiss players to play soul triggers, they play soul triggers.
Yeah, they do.
Like this is a Azkigura number of soul triggers, and it gets to burn one over and over and over again. There are a couple of random things that will shut it off, obviously, right? There's some random like anti-burn one stuff that you can see, but like it's pretty hard to argue with something like this just because like when you're burning one that many times, you have both ceiling and floor, right? You don't have to worry if your swings for 3 are going to be too much, if they're just going to cancel. Ones will stick. They can only cancel so many ones. And honestly, when you're on the opposite side of the table, you're like, "Man, I hope I eat some of these ones because if you eat a single 3, it's cooked." Well, 4 because they're going to trigger.
Right, right, right. And that's when they just side for one.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you want to get really cheeky with this, you could theoretically set yourself up so you have 11 chances at a burn one. And when, you know, out of your 14 whiffs, one's on the board and a choice trigger, you get a couple of things into your level or whatever, get them out of the way. Like, you could probably hit 9 of the 11 siding for one over and over again. And that just works. That's just good enough. And there's no interaction, there's no opportunity to turn this off. So, no, I get it. Like, do I like it? No, because I hate cats. Uh, sorry, Andrew Lloyd Webber, but like I don't love that this list exists, but like if you're gonna print it, people are gonna play it, and this has a ton of good synergy. Like it's a good list. I sure hope that it doesn't get too popular. That's for sure, because I don't want to sit down across from this. This feels bad to play against. Rest of top 8, we have a pair of slimes, a little more of a normal list, Mila Mirren, and then we have this wind choice list. Brandon, you know this Rimuru top end well. You were on it for a little while, and it actually can be quite explosive when it comes off. What do you think of this list? You know way more about this set than I do. I have my own misgivings with the level 1 combo, but like, the Rimuru finisher is always interesting.
It's interesting. Like the biggest downside to this top end, especially, was the memory kick. Like that was the biggest like weakness of the deck itself, because you can basically spawn the same finisher in this lane over and over again. So like, especially in a meta when memory kick counters were very prevalent, that became a bigger issue. But I would say right now that is not the case. That those counters are not as prevalent. So seeing this kind of come through, I think makes a lot of sense. It does have the bounce as well to try to negate some of that too for decks that do. Right now, you are able to pretty pretty effectively get reverses at one. So having a combo that, well, it does require a reverse, can effectively also then go +2, one to stock, one to hand. I think is actually pretty powerful here. It builds up the stock that you need for that end game that does require quite a bit, but also just be able to get a double plus at one, I think just skyrockets your advantage here. Realistically, you also here to be able to loop that a little bit here at two as well, because you also have the back row power option here with the full board 2K plus. So like you're swinging in at 10K with the combo in play at level two. So like you can effectively loop that combo pretty easily, even at two.
Yeah, the on reverse combo that felt so bad a few years ago slowly but surely feels better and better every passing year. And we talk about how, like, we've been in a meta that hasn't been nearly as board dependent. Even in more board dependent Houston, right? And we're going to get into this a little bit more about half of these decks in top 16 play big boards. It's what they do. Not a whole lot of them are getting massive boards at once. You might get a single 2/2 standby target, right? Or something like that. You're not doing an Alice thing where you have this board full of, 10K level 2s down at level 1. You look at your opponent and say, good luck finding your reverses. Most stuff that does build board isn't doing it in the first half of the game. This isn't a Dal meta where it's just a big old board of 1/1s with counter up. It's not doing that. That's not the kind of standby board presence lists that we're seeing in the current state of the meta. So level 1 reverses don't feel as bad as they used to. And I've been slow to jump on this one. On reverse, level 1 just kind of feels bad. It's hard to get that taste out of your mouth. But a double plus level 1 suddenly becomes a whole lot better. Because let's say your opponent is holding up that random level 1 counter, or they've got that 2/2 standby target on the board. Cool, that's fine. I'm still 8K over these other two lanes, getting my reverses pretty easily, and usually people aren't going to, in the early game, play to deny reverses as much as they maybe used to, because it's so important that they get their own advantage with their own combos, as opposed to denying you yours. We might start to see some combo denial come back if more on reverse combos become more and more popular, but right now, where we currently sit, an on reverse level 1 just doesn't feel that bad. The wind trigger usually feels bad. Not going to pretend I love the wind trigger, but
Usually, yeah, usually it does feel bad.
in Houston, I'm looking around, I'm seeing 8 Standby Hololive, I'm seeing Standby Azure Lane, I'm seeing Standby Ruby, I'm seeing Kanata Marine. Yeah, wind trigger feels a whole lot less bad in this tournament than it would have even a few months ago. So, bit of a meta call there. Makes sense. Find yourself in top 8. Finally in top 8, 8 Stock Soul Roroni Kenshin. I am struggling to believe in Kenshin. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm seeing these results. Like, I'm not blind to this. I'm seeing that Kenshin will still find these tops, but then I look at the cards and I read the cards and I go, man, I really don't know how this is doing this. This is different than last time. Level 1 combo. It's an on reverse combo. 7K on reverse. It can give itself character encore. And when it gets a reverse top check at a character, you can do that twice. So can potentially go +6, right? Fills up your hand potentially. Non-selective. The finisher, I like the finisher a lot, but that's because I like finishers of this type. It's a restander that says ditch 2, burn 5. Like, of course I love that. Of course I love that. What if you didn't think I was going to love this card, then you have not watched a single video we've ever done. I don't think it's all that good, but I love it. It also gets to play this Musashi alongside it. Like, it feels like I'm playing something from like 5 years ago, right? Like, this feels like an old fashioned top end in a way. The burn 5 does just stick sometimes, man. Like, people underestimate how good burn 5s are. But when your game plan depends on I need to stick this 5 or I lose, unless you are like full Fumioing with a stock swap, that burn 5 does not feel like something that's going to stick a whole lot. So, and this list doesn't have like a ton of disruption going on. It's got the healer from the trial deck that also says you can have Fumio instead, which is fine. Like half Fumio is half Fumio, but like it's not as good of deck disruption as it feels like you'll need to get there. And like I'm very happy to see this finisher do well. Like this is not a condemnation of the list by any means. I'm not entirely sure how it did this well, but yeah, burn 5. It just works. Let's go through the rest of top 16 real quick. Kaguya, sure. We unbanned Kaguya and now it's back. We did it, everyone. Look at this. Pants, standby, salvage. It's running the package that you would expect, the level 1 pants, into the still pretty good Kaguya salvage finisher, but it's also playing this 2-2 standby combo. It's board advantage, it's soul triggers, right? It's a way to get stuff on the board cheap. It's an excuse to play a standby trigger. Like, sure, it makes sense. In a deck that needs a little bit more oomph in its advantage engine, yeah, I get this. This is a choice that makes a lot of sense. It also plays this really cool 3-1 event that I really, really like. It has a replay effect, draw up to 1, choose up to 3 of your characters, and they cannot be sided into, and they can side for free. Big fan of that with all of the counterplay that we have going on in this meta. So just like, oh yeah, I side for free and you cannot interact with me. Love that. Big fan. Also, you deny your opponent the opportunity to side for lethal. Pretty cool. It's fun to see Kaguya find its way in here. I don't anticipate we're going to see a whole lot of Kaguya. I don't think it's suddenly making its way back. But again, nothing more dangerous than a true believer on a deck they know what they're doing with. Another standby Murin, a 8 standby Ruby, which just kind of hangs around. We've seen that from time to time. 3 Bang Dreams. Oblivionus, Dolores, 2 of them, one of them playing the Tamori finisher. We will put a pin in that. We'll come back to talking about Bang Dream in a second. Choice Pants Freerin, basically a souped up version of the trial deck. And like I've seen this list quite a bit because I've got a local who plays a version of this. So I'm not stunned to see a souped up Freerin trial deck sneak into top 16. The level 1 Maguro with a soul trigger is just not bad. And then you also just lean into the brainstormer that summons your finisher to the board for free. I dig it. It makes sense to me. It I don't think it has as high of a ceiling as the 8 pants list, but it definitely isn't trying to play into the events package as much. So it has other ways of managing the mid game and maneuvering through the mid game. It also gets to play a yellow on attack Azusa, which, yeah, we dig on attack Azusa, especially in a pants list, because it says we're going to do 1, maybe 2 lanes of combo this turn, but we're going to trigger the pants and we're going to get it back. And when this attacks, I'm going to check forward, try to find my combo again. So, and of course you're playing choice triggers as well, so you can always choice the level 1 combo back into hand. Yeah, it's got a lot of it just works going on. Not as high of a ceiling mid game, I guess. Like it's a pretty middling mid game, but it is a solid enough mid game, and you get this quite good finisher for free. So never gonna complain about a decent finisher for free. And then finally, Karatamari, we mentioned Hololive at the top. OG Kanata Marin, just like the list, right? Kanata, uh, one more top before graduating because, of course she does. Kanata, a menace in every card game she's ever been in. So that is what top 16 looked like. Let's look at this other stuff that you've got on your screen right now. Next to the usual top 16 data that we get from Waste Tea Time, we also have the X2 data because Bushiroad finally gave us all this extra information, all this data, all these results. We have a lot more to look at. And I think that, for me anyway, the most important number to look at outside of top 16 itself, maybe even more so than top 16, is the number of X2s. So Brandon went through the data, he picked out all the X2s and collated this for us. Because what ends up happening is you have these players who go X2, and by virtue of tiebreakers, they, who they played, who they didn't play, maybe they got a bye, stuff out of their control. They go X2, but they don't get into Top Cut. So it's very easy to just look at Top Cut and go, oh, this deck didn't make Top Cut or only made Top Cut once and we expected to see it more. And say that it had a bad event, or, if it happens a couple of times, we could say maybe this might be overrated. The X2 data really helps to quell some of that because it identifies decks that bubbled out of Top Cut. So X2 is the number because you usually need to go X2 or better to get into Top Cut. And obviously there's a difference between X2 and X1 and XO, right? If something is consistently going X2, that's good, but it would be better if it was getting some X1s and XOs. Plenty of nuance with this data, but X2 is a good number to use to analyze how a set did in an event. So we're going to do that. And a great example of this is Bang Dream. Bang Dream only had 3 tops in this event, but it had 8 X2s. 23 people played Bang Dream, and a third of them made X2, which is kind of like the standard. This is what you need to get if you want to have a good event. Right? That is like that's the bar for this was a successful event for a competitive player. And 8 of them got there with it. That is important. So we don't want to just look at top 16 and go, oh, there were 3 Bang Dreams that didn't have a good event, when we can look at all of these X2s and go, oh, quarter of the X2s, there were 32 total, were Bang Dreams. And also a third of Bang Dreams were X2 or better. That is a piece of data. The X2 rate that is maybe a little less immediately useful all the time. A high X2 rate is obviously good. Great example of this is Hololive. 5 X2s out of 11 players. Almost half of the Hololive players were X2. That's really, really good. And that's a good indicator of how successful the set was in that event. It's a little more dangerous to do that with stuff that didn't have a high X2 rate. For example, Azure Lane, 26 players played it, only 3 went X2. That can be for any number of reasons. If something has a high X2 rate, it unequivocally had a good day. If something has a low X2 rate, it could be a whole bunch of players who are not very good brought Azure Lane because they like Azure Lane, because Azure Lane was cheap to pick up, because they wanted to play around and get a promo, and Azure Lane is what they had. There are a lot more reasons why an X2 rate can be low than there are for why it can be high. So a low X2 rate, maybe not immediately indicative of anything, but if it happens repeatedly, maybe there's something there. Nikkei is a great example of this. Only 1 X2 for Nikkei, a deck that coming into the season we expected to be one of the 2 best decks in the format. It has not been. 14 players, only one of them going X2, and there are plenty of reasons why that might be the case, right? Nikkei's cheap, Nikkei's popular, Nikkei won Chicago, so like more people maybe want to play it. That being said, if it continually has these low X2 rates, maybe that tells us something about Nikkei that just top 16 data can only infer, whereas this gives us a little bit more concrete, like, oh yeah, like Nikkei is struggling top to bottom. That also being said, Nikkei partially struggling because you've got people who aren't playing the meta lists, right? And that's going to happen with things like Azure Lane as well. Azure Lane, there are a million ways to play Azure Lane, and if you scroll down, you're going to see a lot more Azure Lanes that are, maybe not the top tier Azure Lane stuff, right? You're going to see 8 standby Azure Lane. You're going to see 8 bar Azure Lane. Maybe stuff that isn't as good as what we expected, say, the Pants Azure Lane to be, or obviously in this case, the Unicorn Finisher, which we don't see a lot of in the data. Like scrolling through, looking at these Azure Lane lists, like I'm not seeing a whole lot of choice triggers. So that could be indicative that, hey, maybe this Azure Lane list is doing something special and it's worth paying attention to. So all that to say, there's a lot of nuance to this data set, and sometimes having more data can result in more questions and answers. But I think for the most part, this is telling us useful things. Crucially, the big takeaways for me, Hololive is super back in this format because it is fulfilling that big board role that was kind of vacated by mostly Slime. Azure Lane has a lot of interesting stuff. The Enterprise has struggled. There was a lot of Enterprise in the room, and Enterprise didn't really do a whole lot. I would have expected to see more out of Enterprise. Not going to overreact to that, but that is something to keep an eye on for future events, see if that establishes a pattern. Nikkei, I think the fire alarm bells are starting to go off for Nikkei. Not because Nikkei is bad. I don't think Nikkei is bad. If Nikkei was bad, it wouldn't have won Chicago. I think Nikkei requires a very high level of skill to pilot well. And I think that maybe this big board environment in Texas, where half of top 16 was stuff that was big board specific, might not be as friendly to Nikkei as the previous meta, which was a lot less board dependent and a lot more resource dependent, a lot more about resource management than it was about winning and establishing a board state. But yeah, we're going to keep looking at this kind of data the rest of the season. Really excited to have it. It makes this kind of analysis so much easier, and also hopefully helps us to analyze the game in a way that is more accurate and gives us better indication as to what is and is not good and why, what is and is not succeeding and why. So all that being said, that was the only event this week. We'll be back with something next week, and in 2 weeks, another Clock Talk. We'll talk more about upcoming events. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.